This is the 6th video for Religious Belief Systems in Australia for Studies of Religion, and in this one we're looking at ecumenical movements in Christianity. So in this topic we're going to have a look at, first of all, what ecumenism is, and then we're going to have a look at what sectarianism is, which is kind of the opposite of ecumenism. Then we'll have a look at what types of ecumenical initiatives are taking place in Australia. Then we'll have a look at 3 examples of ecumenism in Australia and some specific examples of the things that they're doing at the moment. So what we first have to understand is that ecumenism can sometimes be confused with another term called interfaith dialogue. As interfaith dialogue sort of would suggest, it's interfaith, it's between 2 different faiths. So interfaith dialogue is not ecumenism, they're 2 separate things. Ecumenism refers to Christianity, and what it's referring to is dialogue and a movement towards unity among different variants or denominations of Christianity. So in other words, it's dialogue and a movement towards unity, for example, between the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. So it's not the involvement of any other faith tradition, it's just in Christian churches involved in a movement towards unity. So what does that movement towards unity mean? Now that we know it's only among Christian variants and not involving any other religious faith, we need to understand what it actually means. So it's probably the best thing to think about it is not seeking uniformity of belief or practice. It's not about saying we're all going to do this. That's not what it's about. So it's not about uniformity, it's about unity. So what it's trying to do is brush aside all of the past sort of historical disagreements and arguments that different denominations have had with each other about their beliefs and their practices, and focus more on what they share together and the unity of their belief that they have. So focusing on what common beliefs they have, and using those common beliefs as a starting ground so that they can do work together. So involved in social justice campaigns, campaigning the government for certain initiatives that they all agree upon, to worship, so recognising that they can all pray together, and then also be involved in religious dialogue, so religious discussions, which is not about trying to convert the other people to your religious denomination. That's not what it's about. It's not about trying to get all the Protestants to go to Catholicism or whatever. That's not what it's about. It's about sharing in religious dialogue without trying to make the other person believe your point of view. That's what dialogue's about. It's about putting forth your idea, coming up with mutual understanding and those sorts of things. So another term that we need to come up with, learn, is called a grassroots movement. And what that means is it's coming from the bottom upwards. That's where the term grassroots movement comes from, because it comes right from the roots of the grass and comes upwards from there. It's not coming from the top down, where you would see it imposed by the church leaders. So generally ecumenism has come forth because we've had not church leaders trying to come together and discussing things, but the general everyday adherents coming together to involve themselves in initiatives. So that's where we've sort of seen the spark and the initiative come forth in the ecumenical movements we've seen in Australia traditionally. So it's as a result of these shared discussions between adherents on the ground floor that we've seen church leaders being more open to ecumenical initiatives at their level, sort of encouraging it at church level, I suppose. And the focus of this was to sort of recognise what's called the scandal of Christian disunity, because traditionally there's been the big problem that we've got all these Christians that believe fundamentally the same things, but it's the small things that they don't agree upon, and that is meant that they're ununified, and that it's trying to rectify some of those issues where we can work together in a lot of these ways for a common goal, or Christians can work together for common goals, so that they can sort of profess Christ's love authentically, rather than worrying about their differences, I suppose. And that brings us to the next point, which is sectarianism, which is the opposite of ecumenism. And that's where we see divisions between different groups within a religion. So sectarianism is not about Christians not getting along with Muslims or Christians not getting along with Jewish people. Sectarianism is about sects, different groups within a religion who don't get along. And that's been a traditional sort of theme across the globe, where you've had lots of different Christian denominations not agreeing with each other in open conflict in a lot of areas as well. So people focusing on what their differences are rather than their common beliefs. So ecumenism is about moving towards what we have in common and recognising those things and being open to work together, pray together and discuss things together, rather than focusing on the differences that they have. So the next thing we're going to have a look at is the ecumenical initiatives and what they are. So I'll go through some of those and give some quick examples of them. There's lots of different ways that they can work. So one example is a joint commission. And this is where we have formal groups who come together to decide on things, I suppose, between them. So one example of that was the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission, and they discussed issues together on baptism, the Eucharist, ministry, authority, and Mary. So they came together as a formal joint commission, the Anglican Church and the Roman Catholic Church, as a commission to discuss some of these things together. So it was an open forum, I suppose, to come up with some sort of consensus that they both agreed upon. So that's one example of a joint commission. We've got another example where we have the Lutheran and the Roman Catholic churches. They had a joint declaration on the doctrine of justification, and that was in 1998. And they were trying to come up with an agreement on the faith and works aspects that sort of divided the faith at the time of the Reformation. So they were trying to come up with some sort of agreement there on where they sort of both stand, I suppose. So they're two examples of the one initiative, which is having a joint commission. You know, that's obviously right up the top in the church level, where you've got the leaders of these churches wanting to come together for these discussions, and their ecumenical initiatives. Then we have another example, which is a practical initiatives, which is where you've got denominations sort of working together on social justice issues, which is probably one of the areas where we see this is maybe a little bit more prominent. And we see that particularly in times of crisis, where you have sort of Christian World Services, difficult times for crises. We have the Palm Sunday Peace March, which we had a few years ago, and I think it's ongoing with the different denominations march together on Palm Sunday. There's another example, was the Drop the Debt campaign, where we had a whole variety of Christian churches working on that together, and responses to various international crises where people will kind of work together. Another example is right at the grassroots, where we have the local parish level, and this is where we might have interdenominational prayer services. So you might have the local Anglican Church and the local Catholic Church come together for a combined prayer service together. So one example of that is there's a group of Catholic and Anglican churches that are in Epping, and they've recently been joining together for sort of prayers during the Lenten season, and that was just this year, so that's quite a recent one, and that was started through a grassroots local parish level type thing. Another example is obviously a little bit higher up again, so this isn't a grassroots level one, but that's at the educational level. An example of that is the Sydney College of Divinity, which you've got different Christian denominations sort of coming together to work on education together, to try and promote education and ministry and those sorts of things. So there's some examples of ecumenical movements in Christianity. You do need to understand how it works and what initiatives are there, and have some examples of what they are as well. Another example of ecumenism, which is really clear in Australia, was the formation of the Uniting Church in 1977. And from their basis of the Union, which is their founding document, they said they were seeking to bear witness to that unity which is both Christ's gift and will for the Church. So what it was an amalgamation of 3 different churches to form the Uniting Church, and that happened in 1977. And this is important, you must learn these figures. That all of the Methodists joined, so all of the Methodists became the Uniting Church. We had 95% of Congregationalists join the Uniting Church, 5% chose not to. So 5% of the Congregationalist churches in Australia chose not to join the Uniting Church and remained Congregationalists. And of the Presbyterians, who was a third group, you had 65% joined, and 35% chose not to join the Uniting Church. So they were the ones who weren't as in favour of it. You must learn that, because that can come up as a multiple choice question as well. So it's now the third largest Christian denomination in Australia, following Catholicism and Anglicanism. So the Uniting Church is quite large because it's amalgamated those sort of three churches, and ecumenism is obviously one of the aims of that church. And the title itself, because they're calling itself the Uniting Church, it's sort of suggesting that its process isn't finished, I suppose, and we have to be open to coming together as Christians. It's not the United Church, I suppose. So that's an example of one group. So that's Uniting Church of Australia. The National Council of Churches in Australia, the NCCA, is another example. And that began after World War II. So it was founded as a result of the World Council of Churches in 1946, and this was like the Australian council that was formed after the World Council of Churches in 1946. So it was initially just an Anglican and a Protestant initiative, but we had various Orthodox groups who joined in the 1960s and 70s, and then the NCCA was formed out of those groups in 1994, and the Roman Catholic Church joined that in 1994 also. And they've got a whole bunch of aims, but as listed on their website, it says, in order to express more visibly the unity willed by Christ. So, in other words, they're trying to come across with that common message that they all have together. So what it wants is to have, as we mentioned before, like all ecumenical initiatives, they want people working together for the common good, praying together, and sort of growing together in their understanding of each other's beliefs and faiths and those sorts of things. So there's 15 members. There's a whole bunch of sort of smaller churches, but the big ones are there, I suppose. Anglican Church, the Roman Catholic Church, those are there, and a whole bunch of other 13 other member churches as well. So some examples of some of the work that they've done. They had the Christian World Service, which was also called the Act for Peace, and that was about sort of looking after war-torn communities and trying to reduce poverty. So that's a social justice initiative conducted by the NCCA. Another example is quite prominent, which is the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, so trying to bring all Christians together, and that happens every year. Every year there's 8 days of prayer, and there's a different focus for each year. They also have a Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Ecumenical Commission, so trying to work with to promote Indigenous rights, and to sort of to look at help the churches sort of come together on those sorts of issues as well. It also has a youth program trying to work with the youth in all of those different churches, and there's a gender commission looking at issues of gender equity and those sorts of things. So that's the NCCA, and again you must learn what the NCCA is, who's in it, what it does, and some specific examples of what it does. The last one that we'll have a look at is the New South Wales Ecumenical Council, which was formed in 1982, and it has 16 churches, and it's I suppose the sub-branch, the New South Wales sub-branch of the NCCA. So this is kind of like the smaller state-based branch, and there's one of these in I think all states and territories in Australia. So it's affiliated again with the NCCA. The Roman Catholics joined it, one of the last ones to join it in the 1990s, the same as it joined the NCCA. And again, its purpose is to try and get people to reflect on theology in a united way, so to have that dialogue and have that understanding that they can all sort of have together, promote grassroots initiatives, tackle social justice issues, and promote education, which is pretty much the same for all of these ecumenical movements. So some examples of what they're doing, there's a recent example, which is a Canberra Christians for an Ethical Society, which is a really grassroots-based movement, which reports to the NSE Ecumenical Council on a variety of issues in their local area. So that's a whole bunch of different churches in Canberra working together for ethical issues, to promote ethical issues, and they report back to the New South Wales Ecumenical Council. And there's also the Taze pilgrimage, which is trying to work together with some Christian brothers in France, and they're working together not just from one denomination but from a variety of different denominations as well. So again, the focus is on working together, understanding one another, and prayer. So they're the three things that we think of when we're talking about ecumenical movements, and there's some examples of them. But you must learn what it is, how it works, who it's with, and some examples of it as well. You you can't sort of leave any gaps in your knowledge here.